Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Ko Janine Dowding tuku ingoa. I'm the lead for the Secretariat, supporting the panel's work into the future for local government review. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today to this webinar to discuss the panel's draft report, He whāriki, He matawhanui. Before we begin, I'd like to ask Antoine Coffin to lead us in with a karakia.
Kia ora mai tātou, e mihi kawana kia koutou ko tai mai nei ki te whakarongo ki ngā kōrero o te puari nei, o tira ki te whakawhiti ngā kōrero e pāna ki te kaupapa i mia tātou, ko te matawhāriki he matawhānui. Nō reira tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Acknowledging those things above us, below us, within us, outside of us, hoping that we are well and that wellness spreads throughout the community. Te hei Māori ora. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Antoine. I would like to acknowledge everybody who's joined us today. At the moment, I can see 22 attendees, but that seems to be building as we go. We have a true appreciation for how busy you all are and are very grateful that you are taking the time or prioritising this time to spend with the panel. The panellists we have on board today, we have Chair Jim Palmer, Gail Surgener, Anton Coffin and Penny Hulse. I do need to express Brendan Boyle's apology. He is unable to attend today and really sincerely regrets that he can't participate today. And this, our lovely panel, and they will introduce themselves in more detail as they come to present to you. A couple of things that I'd just like to call out about this panel: huge experience and depth of knowledge, and that leads into a diversity of thinking that is incredibly valuable. The second thing I'd like to acknowledge is their absolute belief in local government. It is such a strongly held belief, and it's very heartwarming, actually. And the final thing is their absolute dedication to engaging with the sector, with iwi, hapu Māori, with community groups, and as wide an audience as they can get so that they can hear as many voices as possible to feed into their thinking. And they are very genuine in including those voices. The panel have been engaging in a bit of a roadshow across the motu, and they are very aware that not everybody has been able to attend those. So they wanted to make sure it's very important to them that they give everyone the opportunity to hear from them directly and ask them questions. And hence this webinar and a series of webinars that will follow over the coming months. And this one is sector focused. This audience will be very aware of the impact of extensive reforms that are having major implications for local government, and that resulted in a call from local government that the future for local government should have been considered more holistically before embarking on that range of reforms. The Minister heard that call, the Minister for Local Government heard that call, and she commissioned this independent review. This is the timeline for the review, and at this point, what I would really like to highlight to you is the submission period that will close on the 28th of February. Really want to see as many submissions as we can from the widest group of people, and there will be no hearings, but there will be consideration of the recommendations of the review by a working group of central government and LGNZ. But it is likely that with given election timing, that any major legislative changes or major changes for central government will be considered by the next government. So I mentioned before the panel's commitment to engaging, and this is only really a glimpse of how widely they have done that. And as I said, thousands of voices have fed into their thinking. So with that, I'm going to hand over to, I'm just going to note that Penny has advised that she's having connection issues, so we'll work with her in the background and try to sort that out with her. But I'll hand over to you, Jim, to start the presentation.
Kia ora, kia ora mai tātou, ngā mihi nui, I ngā rangatira, iwi uihu, mai nei tēnā koutou katoa. Look, thank you, as Janine said, thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning, really appreciate it. This is an opportunity for us to just give you a bit of a thumbnail of the key points that we've noted in our draft report that is here today for discussion, and we'd be really interested in your questions that follow that, and hopefully that helps you as you and your councils think about preparing a submission on the draft report. I'd just note that our draft report is, we describe it as not a draft of the final. Many draft reports you see, the only thing that changes between the draft and the final is the date of release. Not so with our report. While our report has a number of recommendations in it, it actually raises a number of questions which we genuinely have as a panel that we need to continue to explore throughout the remainder of our review. There are some curly issues, and there's more than one way of skinning the proverbial cat, and so we're really keen to get as much input as we can. Hence our report hopefully stimulates some fairly vigorous debate and challenges us as we continue to evolve our thinking as we head towards our final report. Probably the thing we would note is that to achieve all that we need to achieve as part of our aspiring to have communities as well supported as they can be and councils to be fit for the future, there are a wide range of recommendations, and we don't think any one recommendation on its own is going to be sufficient to effect the change that is needed. And we see our recommendations ultimately as a broad package that have a high degree of interdependence and should be considered as a whole. So I can say hand on heart that the panel has absolute support for local government and the value it has in communities, and really see the value of local government and see the need for it to continue and being strengthened. Some have said, why, with the reform that's going on, do we need local government? We are absolutely committed to the thought that local government plays a vital part in New Zealand's democracy. We all know that there are significant changes ahead, whether that's climate change, biodiversity loss, matters of social cohesion, economic headwinds, and technology change. All of those things are impacting us. And over the next 30 years, New Zealand and the globe, for that matter, are going to be challenged by those. We think that they're issues that can't be solved just through a Wellington approach alone. They need local government. Some have asked us, well, there's nothing wrong with local government as it is, and we agree there's lots of strengths, but we do think there needs to be change and an evolution in the system of local government to enable it to play its part and be able to deliver. Some have said, just give us more funding and leave us alone and we'll be right. We think it's more complex than that, and that the matters that we raise in our report are more wide-reaching than just there being more funding for local government. Yeah, it's an important issue and it's something that we do stress in our report, but it is only one of a number of things that we need to be looking at. And we think that no community nor council is immune from the issues that we raise. So it does require us all to be thinking about how we need to evolve. In our view, local government has a really important role, and particularly because as we are evolving, there are challenges to the way in which the changes that are coming in the next 30 years and the pace of that change is causing many to disconnect and question and trust and lose trust and confidence in democratic institutions. And we think local government, as the layer of government closest to communities, has a vital role to play in strengthening the well-being of New Zealand and rebuilding trust and confidence in democracy, which is so important. So there's lots to be done. There's an important role for local government, but we do need to make some change. And the change is not only for local government. There are as many significant challenges and changes we think needed in the way central government engages and works, and how central and local government work to ensure that they provide best value and use their strengths and resources for best effect for communities. So there's plenty to be done.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm just going to talk through democracy and local government. We know many of our councils have good relationships with their communities. One of the challenges, however, is retaining, strengthening the trust in the democratic system that Jim's just talked about in his introduction. We need to constantly rethink and question what genuine local democracy really means for us here in Aotearoa New Zealand. And this means looking at what improvements might need to be made to help our community engage, and in some cases re-engage with and trust in our democratic system and processes. Local government needs to consider how it facilitates democracy, with elected members around the table not necessarily being the whole answer to delivering democracy. And by that we mean that community expect more than just having elected members speak and vote on their behalf. So we've been thinking really deeply about what democracy means in its fullest extent in Aotearoa New Zealand, drawing on international examples and some of the emerging examples that we're seeing in New Zealand. The three-yearly election cycle is no longer seen as many as being the total answer to inclusive democracy processes, and certainly we've been looking at probably a more sophisticated system that includes complex intergenerational decisions that address the challenge that is ahead of us in the 21st century, and some of those that Jim's already mentioned. Building high trust in those processes, which also builds trust in these democratic institutions, and we think locally is the place that we can start doing that. We've been promoting the idea of citizens' juries, citizens' assemblies that made up of community members who are representative of the demographic makeup of the area, and they're given the opportunity to work with experts to come up with solutions to complex issues and help guide the decision making of their council. And we're starting to see some of those processes implemented here in New Zealand. We've had the whāriki example of deliberative democracy, where randomly selected people in the community have been given a really gnarly question to answer. What's the future of water in Auckland? That's a very controversial topic. And so they've gone away and come back with what they think might be things specifically for whāriki in Auckland to focus on. There's some really good examples in Australia and other places. We recently met with the CEO from Aotearoa, and they're embarking on a deliberative process looking at climate change in the Porirua and wider district as a really gnarly issue for them to come to terms with. All the international evidence shows that citizens directly involved in decision making with the right support can make and help make decisions that are really challenging for politicians alone to make. So we see there's a really important relationship between having elected representatives on your cycles, but also augmented with citizens being able to not only participate, but also help in decision making. Communities have told us that they want to see themselves reflected in the workings of councils. And as a panel, we're recommending that central government support strengthening opportunities for councils to make greater use of deliberative and participatory democracy tools. And I'm just going to pass over to Penny for the next little section.
Kia ora, Antoine. And as Antoine has said, we've looked at a wider and broader approach to democracy, but that in no way undermines at all the importance of elected members. And if anything, means that from an elected member perspective, your role is going to be so much more vital, because it's going to take that visionary and well-informed leadership and brave leadership to help us through the issues that Jim outlined in his introduction. Elected members have shared with us really strongly their desire to be able to focus more strategically and also to work more positively with their community. And as Antoine mentioned, looking at Ngāti Toa and whāriki, using the deliberative democracy tools to solve the really gnarly complex problems that sometimes are really difficult to make just as politicians. And we know that these long-term intergenerational decisions can be pretty challenging to make given the current electoral process. So we've looked at a few things to try and strengthen the role of elected members, strengthen the ability for elected members to do intergenerational decision making, and look at the kind of gaps in and strength that might exist around the council table. So we've come up with a few ideas. Some of them have made headlines, and some of you, I'm sure, will have some strong ideas and questions about them. But we're suggesting that councils have the opportunity to appoint mana whenua reps and possibly to fill perceived gaps around the council table, and some discussion and I'm sure questions around how those gaps are identified will be appreciated. As you would have read in the media, we're suggesting lowering the voting age to 16, and that discussion is sort of rather running along ahead of us. We've also looked at ways to increase the conditions, improve the conditions for elected members, and that's not just, it was reported as being just about money. It's not. It's the wider ecosystem of support that exists around elected members to enable them to do the best work they possibly can. We're also recommending a move to STV nationwide to increase the diversity and the power of people's individual votes. So I'm now going to pass back to Antoine to talk about the Te Tiriti partnerships. Kia ora.
Hey, thanks, Penny. During our meetings across the country, we've been really privileged to get around the country, and some of that was during COVID, so there were little gaps there. We were able to meet people in person, but we're also able to meet online with people individually, and we caught up with about 55 iwi, about 20 hapua from memory, all units of council, all 78 units of council, at least 2 or 3 times now. And they've really shared with us the potential and value of enhanced relationships with iwi hapu Māori, and a wish to work together to face some of these challenges together. The LGA provisions, as you all know, were developed some 20 years ago. We have had the Auckland amalgamation some 10 years ago, but we really feel that the LGA is really out of step with where the progress that a lot of local government has made. And you look across the system, you look under the RMA, and there's a lot of bespoke arrangements, there's treaty settlements, and those are probably far ahead of where the LGA perhaps perceive that progress might be made. So there's a bit of catch up to be made there, but we also think there's a role for the legislation to be much more enabling and allowing good practice and best practice to move across the system. We think there's a role for a clarification of the expressions of rangatiratanga and kāwanatanga. We often talk about these things in perhaps an academic or conceptual manner, but we think that we've reached a time of maturity where we can start articulating what we think these things mean for Aotearoa New Zealand, particularly in a local government and local governance context. We think there's a need to enhance the knowledge and draw on the understandings of Māori concepts and wellbeing. We see lots of long-term plans, strategic plans, and other types of strategic documents that councils prepare often have translations into Māori. There's drawing on whakatauki or pepeha, tribal sayings and sort of proverbs that give deeper meaning to the work that local government does, and we think that could be enhanced, and many of the deeper understandings that Māori have about their environment could be a normal part of local government moving forward. We do recognise that not everyone's starting from the same place. We've seen some wonderful examples of relationships, partnerships, and ways of doing things together in joined up ways. But we've also seen the diversity of where people are coming from very rudimentary, just getting to know each other, to very sophisticated and complex statutory arrangements. So we see the future of local government in this space as an evolution, one that builds on the good work that's been done but provides more support where there are gaps. We're certainly proposing a framework in Chapter 3 that makes the roles and partnerships more coherent, and we expect that there will need to be more increased capacity and capability, and a system that we colloquially say raises all boats. So acknowledges the good work that's been done but builds on that across the system. We see the future relationships as being mana enhancing, sharing and respectful of Te Ao Māori, embraces tikanga and is responsive locally. We've identified 6 specific areas. Again, Chapter 3, this is not a shout out for go and have a look at Chapter 3, but it is. Have a look at Chapter 3. It's a really fulsome articulation of our views in regards to treaty relationships and partnerships and Te Ao Māori values. We're really keen to hear your views in the space. We're promoting an inclusive process for developing Te Tiriti provisions that drive and clarify the exercise of kāwanatanga and rangatiratanga, a partnership framework that complements the existing informal and formal arrangements across the system, and statutory recognition of maintaining capability and capacity and knowledge and understanding of te tiriti and the whakapapa of local government and Te Ao Māori values. That'll primarily be with the Chief Executive. Building Māori capacity and to participate in local government and recognise the duties and responsibilities undertaken by iwi hapu Māori representatives. Workforce plans and use relationships and partnering, and funding capability and capacity for te tiriti-based partnerships. A little bit of a mouthful. But have a look at chapter 3, and there's much more detail there that I'm sure you'll find really interesting. I think I'm going to pass over to Gail, who's going to be talking to wellbeing.
Ora koutou, ko Gail Surgeon Aho. I'm in Tamaki Makaurau, where I've worked in local government over the last 10 years here, and before that worked in central government and community and social enterprises in Wellington. So I'm going to talk about the role of and function, wellbeing, and the relationship between local government and central government. So in our terms of reference, we've been asked to look at the role and function of local government. And as Jim said, New Zealand is changing and local government's role in the community is also changing. Now this is incredibly challenging, and we're very conscious that all the reforms happening at the moment also have an impact on the role and function. But having said that, we also think it's a really exciting opportunity for renewal and strengthening of local government, and that local government, as Jim said, has a vital role to play. And we've also heard all around the country about how important it is to keep the local and local government. We know that there's big challenges ahead over the next 30 years, and also, as Jim said, there's no one sectoral level of government alone that can address these challenges. So that's made it quite difficult to delineate this is just the role of local government or this is just the role of regional or central government. So we're looking at it in a more principle-based way. We know that there's community expectation that local government gets more involved in issues impacting people and communities, as well as the infrastructure and environment role that local government plays at the moment. So when we think about it's not an either or, we're thinking about housing, for example, that's primarily a central government responsibility, but there's a lot that local government can do to support that as well. Climate change, it's something that's emerging as a role and function. It's not baked in yet, what's local government's role and what's central government's role. So there's lots of scope to maximise the strengths of local, regional and national there, but also other areas like economic development and public health that we're still exploring. So it would be fair to say that this is an area that we haven't focused on enough yet, and over the next 6 months it will be a priority for us. But what we have got in the draft report are some initial principles, 3 principles that guide the allocation of roles and functions. The first one is that local government, acknowledging that local government has a significant ability to influence and create the conditions for local wellbeing. And secondly, subsidiarity. We think that that should be at the heart of any allocation of roles and functions. And that means that we should really be considering local delivery as a first priority. And what really needs to be distinctly local is really important. And then the third principle is partnerships with hapu and iwi and Māori grow. That creates an opportunity for new ways of delivering roles and functions locally. So many people along our past 18 months have told us that one-size-fits-all solutions aren't appropriate, and local context and strengths also are important for influencing role and function. So in some communities, the local context and strengths may provide an opportunity to do something that another community isn't so well placed to do. So in this roles and functions area, we are putting our minds to what changes would enable local solutions to local challenges. And at the same time, also what may need to be delivered at a bigger scale, because it needs to be delivered consistently, or it doesn't need to be tailored for distinctly local conditions. And we'd love to hear any feedback from anyone about those principles. We're aware that there are 3 quite broad ones, and we might need to add to that. So really welcome submissions on role and function. And we're looking at community wellbeing as well, and the role that local government can play as a champion and activator. We know that community wellbeing is at the heart of everything local government does, and it's at the core of council's purpose. But we think that there is more that councils could do, and part of that is actually seeing everything that council does through a wellbeing and equity lens. And also more partnering with others is going to be essential for unlocking the potential for ensuring greater community wellbeing. So we're looking at some enhancement of roles, and a few of those we've suggested in the draft report include councils being an intentional anchor institution in a local community, and that means playing an even more vital role in the local economy, and that could be by leveraging its purchasing power through procurement, unlocking the relationships and the proximity to community for greater wellbeing with other anchor institution organisations like key employer, business, marae, hospital, university. Secondly, a system leader and convener. Lots of councils already do that when an issue emerges that is a key priority for the community, but it's not consistently done or recognised. Places where all of the complex issues play out, and the way that central government's organised in its functional silos means that often there isn't that person joining all the dots or organisation joining all the dots as a systems leader. So bringing people together, connecting, advocating about community wellbeing is an important role. And thirdly, as a place shaper and placemaker, creating places and spaces that people love, that create identity and belonging. Again, this is something that many councils are very active in, but it could be made more sustainable. Through shovel-ready projects in the PGF fund, a number of placemaking initiatives have been supported, but this needs to be made more sustainable and this role further recognised. So we've got a fantastic base to work off, but it needs a stronger mandate and commitment, we think, better resourcing and more collaboration. It's also probably going to require some new skills, capability and mindset if we're really going to power up these roles. And this really leads on to the relationship with central government and funding. As Jim said, many of these things are very interconnected. So we know that that enhanced role in wellbeing requires a different relationship with central government. We know that central government holds most of the leverage, the levers and the resources for wellbeing, and it's been communicated to us by many people that if there's one thing this review could do to make a difference, it would be to influence a more trusting and more collaborative relationship between local and central government. We're of the view that at the moment, the strengths of both are not being maximised, and a more relational model needs to evolve. We've also recognised that there needs to be probably some more formal mechanisms or arrangements so that funding and roles and responsibilities can be shared. And some of those we've mentioned in the draft report, and we'd love to have some feedback. They include city or town deals that we've seen happen in the UK and increasingly in Australia. We've looked at the Welsh model for wellbeing and suggested maybe how that could be adapted for New Zealand. We've looked at also at some of the examples of place-based initiatives that local and central government have worked on over time, and tried to draw out what's made some of those things work. So again, like role and function, the local central government relationship is something that we're going to be prioritising over the next few months. And we'd love to hear any feedback about ideas that people have for how to get a shift in that dynamic. We're also collaborating with organisations like the Productivity Commission, who recently put out a report called Fair Chance for All, looking at what's getting in the way of making a difference to equity and in the places and situations where we're not making a difference to outcomes for people in the most disadvantaged communities. So they've really pinpointed the public management system and how that needs to change if we're going to make a difference to place-based disadvantage. So we're looking to collaborate with them as well. So now I'll pass on to Jim, who's going to pick up.
Thanks, Gail. You know, we've heard numerous comments about funding through our review, and as I mentioned earlier, some have suggested it's just a matter of central government giving us some more money and getting out of the way. We wish it was as simple as that, but we acknowledge that there are some funding challenges. We have heard many say that the system is at breaking point and that we've reached peak rates, and that what we can do, if we continue to do that, that's unsustainable for communities and probably politically unsustainable for councils as well. There are a number of things which we need to be thinking about, and through reviews of funding and financing in local government over decades now. There have actually been 16 reviews of funding and financing previously, and they've made many recommendations about what could change or should change. Sadly, few of those have been implemented. The panel's view is if there is to be a meaningful change in the way in which central government and local government works together, how roles and functions are given effect to, and there needs to be some meaningful change in the way the system is funded as well. We are concerned, as many are, that central government, through passing of legislation and regulation which increases the amount of obligation and requirement on local communities and particularly local councils, it's put huge pressure on local government, and when added to growth challenges, tourism impacts, the infrastructure deficit that is being felt across the nation, that's put burdens on communities that local government have been either reluctant to or unable to fund. So to address some of those issues, the first thing that we would say is we need to address the issue of the unfunded mandate. That is where legislation and regulation is passed that places significant obligation and burden on communities. To address that, we think when those regulations are set, there's a thing called a regulatory impact statement that is prepared, and that's meant to consider the impacts of the proposed regulation. to date, we don't think sufficient emphasis has been given as to what are the impacts and fiscal challenges that come with implementing that, especially for local government, and believe that that process should identify where the national good benefits that flow from the proposed regulation occur, and where they are identified, then national funding provision should be made for those, so that those costs aren't solely borne by local government. We also think we need a new way to how we fund community outcomes and priorities. As Gail mentioned, if we're to be successful at all, we need a new way in which central government and local government partner. Core to that, we think, is identifying what are the priorities and outcomes that are particularly relevant and important at place within communities, and then having agreed those between central government and local government, along with others such as hapu, iwi, Māori, business and community, how do we then look to co-invest to address those challenges? There's lots of money directed at communities and local government from central government, but as has been mentioned, it's not always that well joined up, and even within central government, there's a tendency to live within their own swim lanes and just invest for the priorities that are important to them. How do we get that in a more joined up way, identifying those priorities and then agreeing how we invest in those? And we do see central government needing to make a significant contribution to that and providing a good part of the funding to enable then local communities to give effect to the priorities. And I think it would be fantastic if the decisions around that were actually also delegated and able to be made at a local place. We think this is one of the keys to ensuring that central government and local government are working more effectively and using their strengths and resources for the benefits of community. While the rate system is creaking, we think there is a strong place for rating still within the system of local government. And one of the principal reasons for that is about retaining local autonomy. For communities to be able to decide what they want and need, and if that is different to what is available elsewhere or what might be nationally prescribed, then the ability for local councils to be able to rate is an important feature. But we have heard from everyone and agree wholeheartedly that some of the processes around rate setting, particularly the long-term plan processes, need simplification and streamlining. Also, some of the rating processes could benefit from simplification as well. One of the main issues that we've talked about, and that is top of mind in all communities and across the globe, is that of climate change. And we add to the calls that others have made that there needs to be a substantial intergenerational climate change fund to deal with the challenges that are coming at us. And importantly, where those issues have play out at place, because all climate change plays out geographically at place, then communities and we think local government should have a significant say in what are the priorities and what needs to be invested to actually meet those challenges and ensure that the impacts of climate change are dealt with as appropriately as they can given the local context. So they are some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of funding and financing, and we've got a couple of other things under consideration that hopefully through discussion will come through in our final report as well. To give effect to all of the things that we've talked about this morning, we do need to think about, have we got the design of the system that is right for the future and enables us to be well placed and fit to meet the challenges that are ahead of us. We think that the status quo is not that well placed to meet the future challenges, and we do need to think about structures and systems to support local government to be the best it can be and be fit for the next 30 years and beyond. As part of our review, we've heard many views about this, and we know it's going to be a large part of the conversation. but it is just part of the conversation. And to that end, we've been reluctant to nail our colours to the mast and say this is what we think is the answer as part of this draft report, because as other reform agendas have shown, as soon as we do that, the conversation about everything else that we've talked about to this point this morning will cease, and all we'll talk about is what's the structure and what's the impact for us. So as part of our draft report, we've been reluctant to specify exactly what the solution should be or could be. Rather, we've developed some design principles that we think should be present in a future system, as well as we've provided 3 examples of how those principles could be applied. In terms of the design principles, what we've thought about, there are 5 principles. Firstly, as Gail has mentioned, the importance of keeping local in local government. So we think a principle is that local should strongly be reflected in the future structure of local government. Second, also, as Gail mentioned, the notion of subsidiarity, that decision making is made at the most appropriate level, and the consideration of that is really local first. The third principle we have is one around being resourced. Local government of the future needs to be viable, and it needs to have sufficient capacity to be able to contribute and respond to the challenges that are in front of it. The fourth principle we've outlined is one of partnership, and that is essentially ensuring that the arrangements are as flexible as possible to enable ways of working that best meet and will deliver on the needs for community. Now, whether that's council-controlled organisations, whether that's co-governed arrangements, and we've seen many great examples where local government and hapu iwi Māori organisations have come together and worked together for the benefit of communities and advancing community outcomes. The system should also be flexible enough to enable other partnering arrangements as required to give effect to community outcomes. And the fifth principle that we have talked about is one of economies of scope, recognising that where skills and resources need to be combined, that the system enables that to occur also. So those 5 principles, we're keen to get feedback on whether they are the right 5 principles or whether people have other ideas or thoughts we should be thinking about. Taking a step on from that, we have provided 3 examples, and I'd stress they're examples, not options, but 3 examples of how those design principles could be given effect to. And simply those 3 examples are a unitary model, which you'll be familiar with, is applied by 6 councils across the motu now. And if there was a unitary model, it probably needs to be, at a scale that enables some of the challenging issues to be dealt with. And that's going to mean that there will need to be effective community or local boards in place to support and give voice to their local communities. So that's one example. The second example is a regional and local councils with more explicit recognition of the roles and responsibilities of a region and a local council. Probably the regional part of that would have broader functions than current regional councils. And the third model that we've thought about is one called a local combined authority model, where you keep local councils, but you then have a combined authority that enables councils to come together and agree what needs to be delivered with more scale to it across a region. And that is particularly the case for back of house services, where there is greater economies that can be reached through having more integrated, consistent systems. If you're suffering from insomnia, if you want to explore more on that, I'd direct you to about page 214 of our draft report, which talks more about those principles and examples. We note that whatever system we come up with, they will all have strengths and weaknesses, and we'll want to explore that further over the coming months. And it's quite possible that there is more than one structural solution that is needed to suit the local circumstances. We'd be really interested in your feedback on both the principles and the examples that we've outlined, and any other models that you think we should be thinking about. Whichever structure that that is finally identified as preferred, we think it's clear that there needs to be greater collaboration, innovation, and shared services within local government, whatever structure is adopted. Long term, if we still in 30 years' time have 78 bespoke ICT and business processes that we currently do, then we won't be doing ourselves any favours in our view. We also think there's an opportunity for a more joined up public sector. And this is where local government and central government work closely together, bringing their strengths and resources to deliver more value for communities. Things such as shared training, systems development, and secondment are obvious starters in our mind, how we can start working more closely together, building trust and confidence in each other, and actually starting to get to know each other better, which is a significant step along the way to building closer, stronger, more joined up public services. So there are some of the ideas that we've been thinking about in terms of the design, but there's a further feature that we are thinking about, and that relates to system stewardship and support. By stewardship, we're thinking about how do we ensure the long-term health and well-being of local government. Currently, there are a number of local government stewards who play a role, such as the Minister of Local Government, the Department of Internal Affairs, the Secretary of Local Government, the Local Government Commission, LGNZ, and Taitura. They all play roles in providing stewardship and leadership to the local government system. We think there's an opportunity to reflect on that and see where there are opportunities to strengthen the stewardship function so that the system more actively promotes and cares for local government, including monitoring and oversight of the system's health, including the legislative provisions and their adequacy, including care for the system's long-term capability and its people, maintenance and enhancement of institutional knowledge and information, and supporting partnerships, co-design and innovation. We think they are all things that we should explore a little further in the coming months. We'd be interested in your views on that, and we're actually keen to be talking to people and entities that have a strong role in the stewardship function to get their thoughts on this issue also. We're now, just in conclusion, we've talked a lot about this morning about the changes that are needed to the system. A number of the changes, as I mentioned at the start, have a high degree of interdependence, and we need to think about implementing them as a package. Some of them are going to need system design changes, but we think a lot of them are able to be implemented now. We don't need legislation or central government to tell us how we can adopt more participative and deliberative democracy. We don't need central government to tell us how to collaborate more. We don't need central government to tell us how to build stronger partnerships and relationships at place. They are things that we can, and in our mind, we should get on with advancing now. Having said that, we're really conscious that there's lots on at the moment, a big reform agenda. So we're not saying get out there and do it all right tomorrow, but let's start experimenting, learning, sharing the lessons that each of us learn as we start doing things differently and start building our collective knowledge and understanding. We also think that there are a number of things that central government can also be starting to do now. The last comment I would make is that the panel is conscious that our final report is going to be completed in June. And where we are in the general election cycle, that means that most likely it'll be a new government that considers the recommendations. There is going to be a working party of central government and local government to reflect on our recommendations and consider the pathway forward. And as part of trying to ensure that future governments are prepared for and understand what we are talking about, we have been engaging across Parliament with other parties, and we've done that at least 3 times with each now to gain an understanding, so they have an understanding, and we've had really good discussions with them. Given sensitivity around reform, it's important to note that we are undertaking a review, not a reform. So if change is needed following that, then what is the pathway that needs to be followed? How do we get change implemented that is both agreed and accepted by all, whether that's local government and central government? That's going to be an important part of our work over the next 6 months, and probably for the sector beyond. So thinking about how do we influence change is something that not only we as a panel are thinking about, we think it's something that all of the people who have an interest in local government should be thinking about, and how do they influence those who are ultimately going to have some responsibility for implementing our recommendations. And we would implore you to think about what role you and your council and the sector can play in that as well. So with that, I'm going to pass back to Janine, who's just going to share what we're up to next.
So let's talk a little bit before we wind up about where to from here. The panel are continuing their roadshows and webinars. As I said, this engagement is very important to their thinking. And then we'll be, obviously, the panel will be looking at submissions after they close on the 28th of February, and before then as we receive them. So any that can come in earlier, great, because we really want that thinking, offered to the panel. And then the report is due on the 19th of June. So we're full steam ahead. The panel are working very, very hard with all of the very complex details that complexities that they're having to work through. We really urge you to make a submission and to encourage your communities to make a submission. And if there's anything we can help you with from the Future for Local Government review in terms of material or any other information, please don't hesitate to reach out to our communications team, and we'll do what we can to support you in that. I'm going to invite any of the panel members to make some closing comments, perhaps Antoine, and followed by a closing karakia.
It looks like I got a nod there. Kia ora everyone, thanks very much for taking time out from a busy Friday. They always say don't start a project on a Friday, but so this is a nice end to the week perhaps. So I hope you're all well and your family well. We are aware that COVID is spreading around the country, so please look after yourselves and your family members and friends at work. Look out for each other, it's really important. So I'll close our hui this afternoon and wish you all well for the weekend. Unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia mama, te ngākau te tinana, me te wairua i te ara takatā. Koia rā e rongo whakaiake ki runga kia tīna, haumi e, hui e, taiki. Kia ora mai tātou.